Lindsay Williams, and I have with me today a guest, Rodney Balance. The standard currency of the world is crude oil. It is not the dollar, nor the yen, nor the pound, nor the won, nor the ruble. The Middle East right now is in crisis. What happens in the Middle East will affect every facet of our lives, from the grocery store to the airline ticket that you may want to travel on, to the value of the dollar and what it will purchase. $1.50 a gallon 3 years ago to $4 a gallon now. Gasoline still 4 quarts. Remember, it's not the gasoline that's changed. The gasoline is still 4 quarts per gallon. What has changed? The value of the currency that you're using to purchase that gallon of gasoline with has deteriorated to the point that it is there. Now, may I state emphatically, if I can at this point, this positively is not a conspiracy. This is an agenda. Note the difference between the two words. The first agenda is the New World Order.
Of its founders.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.
The privilege of having with me today Rodney Balance. Rodney, welcome.
Thank you, Pastor. It's an honor to be here with you. I just can't tell you how excited I am to be able to share the global information that you're bringing to the viewers of this message and couple it with personal finance and how it impacts us here in America from a personal level.
Well, give me some of your background, Rodney, and why does the audience need the material that you'll be giving today?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to be in the financial services business for the last 2 decades, where I've helped people from all walks of life, everywhere from multimillionaires turning their money into more and people who were so buried in debt they didn't know where next week's groceries were going to come from. So I've got a good understanding of where most of America is today. And where most of America is that they don't have the inside knowledge or the opportunity to have the information that you bring to the table and how to use that to form their future decisions about their financial tools and implementation. So as a professor teaching personal finance at Mid-Atlantic Christian University in North Carolina, the author of several books, including The Love of Money, How to Build Wealth and Not Be Corrupted, and a financial expert for CBN television, I've got a very good idea and understanding of what people need, how they need it presented, and the best way to help them understand how what you're sharing with them merges with what they need to know to protect their family.
Rodney, I was told many months ago that within 4 to 5 months there was going to be a crisis in the Middle East. Everyone is expected to start with Iran. I happened to be on your talk show at the time and said within 4 to 5 months. Now, people look at me and they say, well, Lindsay Williams, you're a prophet. And I say, no, I'm not. It is because of who I know that I was able to say this. And I appeared on your show and said, Rodney, in 4 to 5 months, there is going to be a crisis in the Middle East. I'd like you to confirm that.
You absolutely did, but you shared more than that. Well, off the air, you shared more than that very day. You also told me that in the short term, silver was going to take a little bit of a dip in the beginning of February, and by the end of February 2011, that silver was going to be exponentially much more valuable. And to the day, you were exactly right. In fact, I made some personal investments based on that information, and I saw a 20% increase in my silver investments in that 30-day period.
I went on radio shows all across America, and I said within 4 to 5 months' time, I have been told by the people who give me information that there will be a crisis in the Middle East. Now, Rodney, I understand that you have some information that came from documents from the federal government that there would possibly be a crisis?
Yes, yes. Actually, in 2008, a U.S. State Department diplomat, he had papers memos that were confiscated in the Cairo airport. A London newspaper, the Telegraph, got a hold of these documents. In these documents, Pastor, it clearly stated, and they gave the months and the days, and this State Department employee was working with government organizations, labor unions, as well as U.S. government, not Egyptian government, but U.S. government organizations, the Muslim Brotherhood, the labor unions, as well as other youth organizations, to cause an uprising. What they were hoping for, according to this document, was to create an uprising that would eliminate the current regime under Mr. Mubarak before the presidential elections, the Egyptian presidential elections before their elections in 2009. The memo also says that they realized the time frame was too short and they were going to strive for do it before the presidential election of 2011, which is in September of 2011. So all of these plans were laid out in a government memo in 2008 for the Egyptian government to be overthrown, the President Mubarak to be overthrown before the Egyptian presidential election in September 2011. And it is well documented. You can go to the London newspaper called The Telegraph, and you can see the actual documents.
So all of this was planned well in advance. They knew it was going to take place. What is taking place in the Middle East today was no surprise whatsoever. To my informants, I was told that it was going to take place in 4 to 5 months. I asked them at the time, because Iran was such a crisis point, and I asked them at the time, I said, is this going to be an Iranian crisis? They wouldn't respond to me. I said, where is it going to be? They wouldn't tell me where. I did not know where it was going to take place. I merely knew it was going to take place. So that means then that the powers that be brought this on in the Egyptian routes. Now, let me go back a ways. In 2008, I was told by my informants that there was going to be a major shift in the price of crude oil. In fact, they said the price of crude oil is going from $147 a barrel to $50 a barrel, and they said it'll take place within 3 months from now. I went on major radio talk shows all across America, and I risked my reputation and said there is going to be a change in the price of crude oil from $147 a barrel to $50 a barrel. People laughed at me. They thought I was crazy. In fact, I had one radio talk show host that actually laughed at me over the radio. And then another time, I had a Wall Street analyst that happened to be on a program with me, and he said, Chaplain, you shouldn't say this. He said, this is going to impact, he said, this would impact the world in such a way that it would be catastrophic. Well, it not only went to $50 a barrel, it went to $43 a barrel, and it went to $1.50 a gallon at the gas pump. And at the same time, I was told by my informants that it would be 2.5 years before the price of gasoline and the price of crude oil would go back up again. Now, folks, you can go back and see this. It was archived in many radio talk shows across America. It was not hidden. I said it in my own DVDs back in those days before it ever happened, and it took place exactly as they said it. So they knew in advance what they were going to do. And they said it'll stay there at that price, $50 to $70 a barrel, for this 2.5 year period. Then, at the end of the 2.5 years, they came back and said to me, Chaplain, the price of crude oil is going back up again. And I, just a few months ago, said, folks, get ready. You're going up to $150 to $200 a barrel on crude oil. And exactly as my informants had told me, it began to happen. Now, what does this mean? At this point, people called to me and said, Lindsey Williams, you're a prophet. And my response to them is, I am not a prophet. I'm just an ordinary everyday guy that puts on his britches just like anybody else does on any given day. But it just so happens that I know the people who are doing it. Now, what does this mean, basically, to the person out there in the listening audience? Let me go back a ways and try to explain it if I can. 35 years ago, I had a very unusual experience. It was 1970 that I went to Alaska as an aviation missionary. I had only been in the state for a short time, and I heard they were going to build the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline, and that approximately 50,000 men would converge on the state to build that 800-mile, 4-foot diameter pipeline. The first thing that came to my mind as a missionary was 50,000 of the roughest, toughest, cussingest, drinkingest, orneriest folks on the face of the earth. They must need some spiritual guidance. So I went to Alaska Pipeline Service Company, the consortium of 9 major oil companies that were going to build that pipeline, and I said, don't you need a chaplain on the pipeline? They laughed at me at first. They said, we never had a chaplain on any pipeline in the world. I kept going back and back and back. I guess persistence paid off, and finally they said, okay, we'll give you the northern 7 camps, beginning at Prudhoe Bay, where the big oil field is on the Arctic Ocean, down to Galbraith Lake. Just go up there and see what you can do. I did. I'm sure they thought I wouldn't last very long, but 6 months later I was still there. And they came to me and said, Chaplain, you're saving us thousands of dollars of counseling fees that we're not having to pay. We never had a chaplain on a pipeline before. We didn't know your value. We would like to offer you executive status. Now, this could only have happened by the providence of God. There is no way that a little insignificant, unknown missionary out in the bush of Alaska could have ever lived with the elite of the world. For 3 years' time, I was invited into their board meetings. They said, Chaplain, we'd like you to sit into the board meetings in order to help the relationship between management and labor. I lived with the people you hear about in the World Bank, the IMF, the top oil company officials of the world. It changed my life, because if someone had asked me before I went to the pipeline and lived with these people and stayed in the dorm with them, sat across the dinner table from them, and talked with them, not in my church, but on their oil field, if someone had said to me, Chaplain Williams, do you believe there's a group of people on the face of the earth who control the world? I would have laughed at them and said, who are you, a John Bircher? If someone had asked me after my 3 years of experience, Chaplain, do you believe there's a group of people on the face of the earth who tell the president what to do, who dictate to Congress what bills to pass, who control oil prices and the world and currencies? I would have said, not only do I believe it, but I sat and listened to them talk about it. May I state emphatically, I hope that you'll believe me as a person who has been a minister of the gospel for 50 years. There positively is, on the face of this earth, a group of people who control the world. They tell Congress what bills to pass. They tell the president what to do. And on any given day, our lives are affected by these people. Many of them have to do with crude oil. Now, in the course of this DVD, I'm going to make some very unusual forecasts. These people have told me things, and I'm going to be talking about and showing you what will happen in the Middle East, what you're going to be paying for a gallon of gasoline in the future, what's going to happen at the grocery store just around the corner. I'm going to tell you where gold prices are going. They have already told me, and they have a timeline. Their timeline, by the way, is 2012. And they intend to do what they're going to do with the new world order. By the end of 2012, there are some very definite things that they plan to do. This group of people positively do exist in the world today. And 35 years ago, when I had the privilege of meeting with them, I made friends with some of them. And some of these individuals have kept in touch with me over the years, 2 of them in particular. And as a result, every time they have told me something, it has happened exactly as they said it. Never one time has it been any different. We need to know what happened back then in order to bring up to date. So if I may, I'm sure you're wondering what the rest of the story is. And Rodney, when we look at what has taken place in the past, as a financial advisor, what would you say to your people? How do you plan for the future?
Well, I always tell people, well, one thing for sure is, I always have to tell them, past performance is no guarantee of future returns. That's the law that is set by the SEC and FINRA that I have to always say anytime we're talking about any investments. Now, when I talk about history repeating itself in a general sense, I have to let people know that one thing is constant, one thing is always happening, is that companies, corporations, and governments don't plan the way you and I do as individuals. Many individuals today, they think of long-term planning as what next week's grocery list is going to be. They don't think about long-term planning being 10 years, 20 years, 30 or 40 years. That's impossible to comprehend from most people's point of view today. But I would like you to think about, as Pastor Williams, you're about to share with us a timeline and historical proof of some things that occurred about 30, 35 years ago. I'd like for people to think about the fact that a gentleman named Ted Benna was hired by a large banking organization in 1980 to find a way for them to get out of the pension business. This banking organization understood that come 2010, 2011, and beyond, baby boomers were going to be retiring, and it would bankrupt them if they had to pay pensions for all these employees. So back then they tried to find a way so that they would not have to be on the hook, so to speak, for lifetime incomes for their employees. At the same time, the U.S. Congress and the Internal Revenue Service were looking for ways to shore up potential revenue deficits that were projected at the same time that these baby boomers would start retiring, 2010, 2011, and beyond. So when Ted Benna, this gentleman that was hired by this bank, found the little-known blurb in the IRS code under Section 401, subsection K, he found that that was an opportunity for people to put money aside for their own retirement in a pre-tax method, coming out of their paychecks before they pay taxes on it, and let that money grow in a tax-deferred method so that years down the road they could retire and be taxed on the money then when they pulled it out. This was perfect for what the Congress and the IRS needed. It was perfect for what businesses across the country needed, because it got them off the hook, so to speak, for having to pay these large pensions for lifetime incomes.
So you're saying the demise of the financial system today was known and planned way back in those days, as my informants have told me it was?
Well, what I'm saying is that they planned well ahead, 30 plus years ahead, to prevent the revenue shortfalls. Now, understanding this is how businesses plan 30 and 40 years out, that helps you also understand why we have 30-year treasury notes. Why would we have that if we didn't plan that far out? Who would take debt for 30 years? Who would buy debt for 30 years? And these 30-year notes. And so what I'm trying to do is just help people understand from a personal perspective, from people who our long-term planning is what we're going to do on summer vacation at the longest, or what the grocery list is going to be for next week. Help us understand that it's not unreasonable to believe that organizations and governments plan so far ahead as what you're about to tell us.
Well, let me begin where it began. Bring you up to date with a brief history lesson so that we can comprehend the startling facts that we're going to give as we continue through this DVD. Really, I need to go back to 1901. 1901 in Beaumont, Texas. Some of you may remember something called Spindletop. That was the time at which the first gusher came in of crude oil. And at that time, because of it, 4 major oil companies had their beginning. Texaco, Shell, Standard Oil, Chevron. The majors had their beginning at that point. Now, 1903, Henry Ford produced his first assembly line automobile. This began the great energy crisis rush and crude oil usage that we have in the world today. And in Germany, Mercedes produced their first assembly line, Mercedes automobile. American gasoline back in those days was 15 to 25 cents per gallon. Oil at that same time, or shortly after that, had been discovered in the Middle East. And all of a sudden, the major oil companies, who now had become quite wealthy, such as Texaco, Shell, Standard, and Chevron, they said, all right, there's oil in the Middle East. The Arabs had no way of producing it. They did not have the funds with which to produce their own oil fields. So our major oil companies literally divided up the oil producing countries where they knew the oil was as it was going to be produced in the future. They divided up those countries amongst themselves. For instance, there was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Ken Fromm, whom I knew very well when I lived with these people years ago. And he was given the job by Atlantic Richfield to actually go to the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, and that part of the world and physically build their oil fields from nothing. They knew the oil was there. And our oil companies said, we will build your oil fields. You don't have the funds to do it. And you pay us back after you are producing this oil. And in turn, we will not produce from our own oil fields. This is so significant. Americans have always wondered, why can't we bring in our own oil, have it cheap? Why must we be obligated to the world? There's a reason for this. And it was back in the days when Mr. Henry Kissinger was the Secretary of State. He went abroad to these parts of the world in the Middle East now and said, all right, your oil fields have been built. You've paid the oil companies back for what they did in building those oil fields. He said, I would like to cut you a deal. And the deal basically was, we will buy your oil. You in turn take a portion of what we pay you for that oil with and invest in our Federal Reserve notes, our T-bills, our treasuries. Folks, even back then, they knew what was going to take place in 2012, and they knew that the condition of the dollar, even back in those days, it was all planned way back 50, 60 years ago, because he knew someone had to buy America's debt. Let me try to explain this. The T-bills, the issues of the Federal Reserve, they pay the interest, and foreign countries buy it. China has approximately $1 trillion of American paper. And the Middle East oil producers, they in turn bought it. After all, it was as sound as the dollar. That paper was the most sound paper there was on the face of the earth. And they knew that this could take care of them for many years to come. At least they thought, because that America just couldn't go bankrupt. So they trusted our paper and they bought it. They bought literally trillions of dollars worth of it. So what happened? Here they sit now with our Federal Reserve paper, literally trillions of dollars worth of it. And at this point, we come down to today. Every bit of it was a part, someone had to buy what the powers and the elite of the world knew would be our future indebtedness in the United States of America, and they bought the interest on the debt. This was about the same time, I believe, Rodney, the 401ks came into being, and all of this fit together in them knowing good and well that there would come a time when here in this country we were going to have a major problem financially.
Right. And if you remember now, 401ks particularly are when you put your money into your retirement account before taxes are taken out. It grows without any taxation every year. When are you taxed on that money? It's when you pull it out. So as you are withdrawing that money, when the baby boomers hit, the largest workforce that the country's ever known, when we start to retire and we start to draw money out of our 401ks and our IRAs, we pay higher taxes on that money to the government than we would have paid in the early days when we had tax deductions such as mortgages and children at home and the tax rate was lower. So this was a well-devised, well-planned out thought of retirement planning to benefit the government, because the IRS's theory is pay me a little bit now out of your paycheck or pay me a whole lot more later. So yes, they knew there was going to be shortfalls after the turn of the century, after the 2010 mark particularly.
Now, when Mr. Kissinger went abroad and cut that deal with the oil-producing countries of the world, he knew exactly what was going to take place. He foresaw and all of this planned in advance. I remember one day I was sitting down with one of these individuals at Prudhoe Bay, and we sat for hours as he explained this to me. Now, when Mr. Kissinger went abroad to cut that deal, you buy our treasury notes with a certain portion of what we buy your oil. We will not produce our own American oil fields. There were two nations that would not sign on with Mr. Kissinger. One was Iraq. This is the reason for the Iraq War. Saddam would not agree. He would not go along. The second one was Iran. And you'll remember about that same time, the Iranian crisis took place and the Shah was deposed. Every bit of this was because they would not sign on to Mr. Henry Kissinger's deal that he had gone over to pose to them. And why did we have this? Well, you remember after that, that in Iraq, that Saddam actually threatened Daddy Bush, Senior, the Bush of many years ago, and he threatened him and said, we're going to take your life. This started the whole thing. And the Iraqi war was nothing but an oil war. It's sad to think that these people care so little of humanity. Then we come down to Iran and what's happened there. Now, there are many countries in the world that have the bomb. Why pick on Iran all the time? It's because it was Iran that would not sign on back in those days with Mr. Henry Kissinger, and because of that, we pick on them all the time. It's a part of the whole plan of the New World Order. Now, let's come down to China. You'll remember that Bush Senior, Daddy Bush, was an ambassador from the United States of America at one time to China. China prior to that was a closed society. The Great Wall literally separated China from all the rest of the world. At the time that Daddy Bush went to China as the ambassador years ago, it was the time at which China was brought out of its position of a closed society, and at that time the elite of the world planned what we're seeing today. Every bit of this is a part. Again, I go back, this is not a conspiracy. I do not believe in a conspiracy theory. I'm not a conspiratorialist. This is an agenda to make China what it would be, to bring America to the place where we are today, to have these Middle East oil company producers, which later became OPEC, to have all of this fit into the pot of the New World Order, which they would have later. Now, China, in turn, became, as I was told recently, one of these individuals said to me, he said, China is the big one. He said, never mind what happens in North and South Korea. He said, don't worry about what's taking place in the Middle East. He said, the thing you want to keep your eyes on is China. Now, recently, China made an agreement with Russia. As of last year, Russia became the #1 producer of crude oil on the face of the earth. Prior to that time, it had been Saudi Arabia. Russia bypassed them on last year. Why? Because of their super deep wells that they drilled many years ago and found massive amounts of crude oil. So last year, Russia made an agreement with China. China said, we will buy our crude oil and our natural gas from you. China and Russia said, we'll sell it to you. Do you realize what this is doing? This means then at some point when all right, we'll get into the Middle East in a moment, but you see the building of China, the moving of American industry abroad, the taking away of our jobs in this country, and it was planned and was in the works all the way back in the days when the Middle East agreement was made.
One important note there, Pastor, is that when China and Russia made this agreement, they both agreed that they would not use the world reserve currency, which is the U.S. dollar, to trade in. They agreed to use their currencies instead of the U.S. dollar. That's a very important and significant note, because China also has trade agreements with the country of Turkey. in the same way. They agreed in 2010 to no longer use the US dollar as their reserve currency when they trade back and forth. So when China buys their mass quantities of oil from Russia, they're buying it in the yuan, which is the Chinese currency.
Do you have the slightest idea what Rodney has just said as to how this begins to form the removing of the American dollar, the greenback, as the reserve currency of the world? And again, I stress the fact that as we go on through this, you'll see how it fits into a perfect pattern of what the elite have wanted to do with their new world order. Yes, you're correct. Russia said, China, we will use some other currency beside the American dollar. This is the first time this had ever happened in the history of crude oil, because always the dollar had been used as a reserve currency for the sale and trade of crude oil all over the world. And now, for the first time, our industry has been moved to China. Our jobs have been moved to China. Our dollar now is not the reserve currency of the world. Well, we might say it is, but yet on the other hand, it's beginning to wane very quickly. Every bit of this fits into the total plan of the new world order.
And if people will take a look at their investment strategies, whether it be in their 401k, their IRAs, their mutual funds, whatever they're investing in, and I don't mean to pick on 401ks, but if you will look at one specific area that we've been investing in for years, decades, is emerging markets. People don't understand what emerging markets mean. Emerging markets are the countries that are emerging as significant trading partners in the world, such as India, Pakistan, and countries such as that, in China. And when we are investing in emerging markets out of our retirement account at work, what we're in essence doing is we're replacing our jobs. We're paying other countries to develop a middle class that is actually and documented to be replacing the middle class of America. As these middle class and purchasing groups are being developed in foreign countries to trade with countries such as China, we're replacing the importance and the value of American buyers, American companies, and the American currency.
1970, I went to Alaska as an aviation missionary. It was about that time that it was being made known to everyone that we had major oil finds on the North Slope of Alaska. I shall never forget, the pipeline, Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline, was built 1974, 5, and 6. And in the year 1976, I got up one morning and went over to Arco Base. And as I walked in the door, a gentleman whom I knew quite well said to me, "Chaplain, would you like to see something exciting today?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'm always in for excitement. What do you mean?" He said, "Get in the pickup truck and let's go out to West Dock." And as we rode along, he explained that they had just drilled into numbers of wells a brand new oil field. And they said, "We're going to release some oil today, find the pressure, see what the oil is like." And he said, "Chaplain, you may find this very interesting." So we arrived out at West Dock, sat there a few moments. All of a sudden, we saw a big plume of something come up out there about 2 or 3 miles out in the Arctic Ocean. And he was excited. He said, "Come on, let's go back to Arco Base. I want to see the statistics of actually what they're showing out there at the well." We got back to Arco Base, and I remember we walked up to the second story and walked into the office of the person who was producing the entire east side of the oil field. And I have never seen such excited oil men. There were probably 8 of them standing around a table and looking at things that day. And one of them looked at me and said, "Come on in, Chaplain." He said, "It won't matter. You may as well see it. This is exciting." And as I walked in, I said, "What has happened?" He said, "We have just drilled into one of the largest oil fields ever discovered on the face of the earth." And he said, "This is exciting for America." Well, I remember that day I went back and got a good night's rest that night, and the next morning wanted to get up bright and early and get back to Arco Base, and I thought I'd see on the front pages of the headlines of the newspaper from Anchorage that huge new oil find. As soon as I got back that morning to Arco Base, the security guard caught me at the door, And he said, Chaplain Williams, I want you to go upstairs, sit down in Mr. So-and-so's office, called him by name. And he said, don't you say a word to anybody. He said, I hope you haven't said anything about what you saw yesterday. I walked in the gentleman's office, and in a few moments he came in and he said, Chaplain, what you saw yesterday, I think I'd be careful. He said, we've just ordered that information classified. He said, we will not be producing that oil anytime soon. And I said, you are not going to let the American people have their own oil, bring back the great American dream, give us the opportunity to have gasoline at a reasonable price again. And he said, Chaplain, no. And I said, why not? I said, this is America's oil, on America's own soil. He said, Chaplain, we will not produce that oil field until the price of crude oil goes to somewhere between $150 and $200 a barrel.
And this was in the late 70s?
This was 1976.
Okay.
Oil was $32 a barrel. And I thought in my mind, $100 to $150 to $200 a barrel. I said, in my mind, I thought, this is preposterous. There's no way. The world could not stand $200 a barrel oil. And you haven't heard one thing about that. The only place on the face of this earth you'll ever find this recorded is in my book, Energy Non-Crisis, which now, of course, is out of print. It wasn't long after that that some very unusual things happened. After the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline was over with, I decided that I had a moral obligation. I positively must tell the world what I saw. And I wrote a book entitled The Energy Non-Crisis. It was 1980. And just after I tried every way I could to remember everything I had seen on the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline, but understand I was not a trained oil man. I was just a chaplain. And so my book might not have been word perfect, but I remember just after my book came out, I had a phone call one day from a gentleman. He was livid. He was so angry that he was beside himself. And he said, Chaplain, your book came out, and he said, Atlantic Richfield has just fired me. Now, he was one of the high-ups, pretty close to being on the board of Atlantic Richfield itself. One of the people who had given me so much information over the years. And I said, what has happened? He said, they found out that I allowed you in that room that day to see what happened at Gull Island. And he said, as a result, Atlantic Richfield has fired me. He said, now, Chaplain, your book, Energy Non-Crisis, he said, there are just a few things in that book that are not letter perfect. And he said, they're going to discredit your entire book because of that, because they don't want this information getting out about Gull Island. And he said, would you allow me to rewrite your book for you and make it letter perfect? Oh, he was angry. And I said, sure, I'd be more than happy for you to. He did. He rewrote my book, Energy Non-Crisis. They have never discredited one word of it because it was word perfect. But he wrote another chapter in the book, himself personally. The title of the chapter was, If Gull Island Doesn't Blow Your Mind, This Will. He told everything. He told the depth of the field. He told the pressure of the field. He told the perforations of the pipe. He told everything that happened that day. And when my new edition of the book came out the following year, there were some other things that took place. There's only one place on the face of this earth that this is ever recorded, apart from my book, The Energy Non-Crisis, and it's only alluded to. You may remember back in those days that the John Birch Society was quite popular. And there was a reporter with the John Birch Society by the name of Alan Stang. He found out about this gentleman, and he came to Alaska, and he said, will he let me interview him? He did. This gentleman was so angry until he gave an interview to Alan Stang, and he reported it in the American Opinion magazine. And if you ever want to go back and get one of those copies about 1981, 82, you'll find the only other report that's ever made about this anywhere on the face of the earth, but it indicates exactly what I saw back in those days. Now, at that point, this gentleman and I were invited to speak at Pro America. Back in those days, they had big conventions around the world, a group of very active American ladies. And this gentleman and I were asked to speak at the Pro-America Convention in, I think it was out on the West Coast in California, in San Diego. I remember that night, this gentleman and I were sitting on the platform. He was to speak, and then I was to speak. And I saw him almost shaking. And I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Look in the back of the room, those two men that just walked in." I said, "Who are they?" He said, "One of them is the CEO of Atlantic Richfield." He said, "The other one is a very prominent oil man." He said, "Chaplain, you'd better be careful what you say tonight." He was scared. Shortly after that, he gave me a phone call one day and he said, "Chaplain, I'm sorry, I won't be able to give you too much information anymore." He said, "I've just been hired back by Atlantic Richfield." He said, "I've been given quite a sizable increase in salary, promised a big pension, and he said, they've told me that I shouldn't communicate with you and give you any more information." He said, "They're sending me to Houston to train all the new executives that are going to Prudhoe Bay." Now, all of this is so significant because he told me 35 years ago in 1976, we will not produce the oil from America's own soil. Now, you remember this goes perfectly along with what Mr. Henry Kissinger said? When Henry Kissinger went to those Arab countries who were forming OPEC, the oil-producing countries of the world, and said to them, "We will buy your oil. American companies have produced your oil fields. You've paid them back now. And in turn, you will buy our T-bills and our Federal Reserve issues," which, of course, they didn't know economics. These men were not trained in what was happening with the Federal Reserve. They didn't know that the Federal Reserve was not an agency of the federal government any more than Federal Express is. Don't fool yourself at all.
I don't think a lot of Americans don't even realize that. They think that the Federal Reserve is a government agency, but it's not. It's a private entity.
A private entity, right. And they did not realize that America was creating debt. We began the process of moving our industry abroad just after this, the New World Order. And now we're creating debt, but whenever you create debt, we have 14 trillion plus now. And whenever we create all this debt, the interest, you don't have to worry about paying the debt back. Never mind the $14 trillion. Congress could care less about that. They know it'll never be paid back. It's the interest on the debt that can't go unpaid. And by these oil-producing countries of the world buying our T-bills and our Federal Reserve issues, they put money back in to pay the interest on the national debt. And this is the only reason that America can even be sustained today without having a total financial collapse, is because China, once it began to get our industry and become the great power it is today, as it was planned way back in those days when Daddy Bush opened up China as the emerging country of the world, every bit of it was planned around the fact that today, the year in which we're living right now, a major crisis would take place. And this is what is so significant, to see it unfolding literally before our eyes today.
Mr. Co-President Nigel Farage, freedom and democracy.
Well, good morning, Mr. Van Rompuy. You've been in office for 1 year, and in that time the whole edifice is beginning to crumble. There's chaos. The money's running out. I should thank you. You should perhaps be the pin-up boy of the Eurosceptic movement. But just look around this chamber this morning. Just look at these faces. Look at the fear. Look at the anger. Poor old Barroso here looks like he's seen a ghost. You know, they're beginning to understand that the game is up. And yet, in their desperation to preserve their dream, they want to remove any remaining traces of democracy from the system. And it's pretty clear that none of you have learned anything. You know, when you yourself, Mr. Van Rompuy, say that the euro has brought us stability, I suppose I could applaud you for having a sense of humour, but isn't this really just the bunker mentality? You know, your fanaticism is out in the open. You talked about the fact that it was a lie to believe that the nation state could exist in a 21st century globalised world. Well, that may be true in the case of Belgium, who haven't had a government for 6 months, but for the rest of us, right across every member state in this union, and perhaps this is why we see the fear in the faces, increasingly people are saying, we don't want that flag, we don't want the anthem, we don't want this political class, we want the whole thing consigned to the dustbin of history. And we had the Greek tragedy earlier on this year, and now we have the situation in Ireland. Now I know that the stupidity and greed of Irish politicians has a lot to do with this. They should never ever have joined the euro. They suffered with low interest rates, a false boom and a massive bust. But look at your response to them. What they're being told, as their government's collapsing, is that it would be inappropriate for them to have a general election. In fact, Commissioner Wren here said they had to agree their budget first before they'd be allowed to have a general election. Just who the hell do you think you people are? You are very, very dangerous people indeed. Your obsession with creating this Euro state means that you're happy to destroy democracy. You appear to be happy for millions and millions of people to be unemployed and to be poor. Untold millions must suffer so that your Euro dream can continue. Well, it won't work, because it's Portugal next. With their debt levels of 325% of GDP, they're the next ones on the list, and after that, I suspect it'll be Spain. And the bailout for Spain would be 7 times the size of Ireland, and at that moment, all of the bailout money has gone. There won't be any more. But it's even more serious than economics, because if you rob people of their identity, if you rob them of their democracy, then all they are left with is nationalism and violence. I can only hope and pray that the Euro project is destroyed by the markets before that really happens.
Thank you. The next
And I think it was Rahm Emanuel, President Obama's person, that says, never let a good crisis go to waste. Understand that when you have, first off, a corporation, any major corporation, will never allow any of their higher executives or their board members serve on the board of a competitive company, right? What good? Why? The company wouldn't want them. Why is it then that Timothy Geithner, the Treasury Secretary for the United States, and Ben Bernanke, the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, both sit on the board of directors for the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank for all 55 of the Earth's central banks. And this, one reason I believe is happening is it's pushing us to a financial crisis so that we will eventually adopt a one world currency that is being promoted by this Bank of International Settlements and developed by the International Monetary Fund. It's called SDR, Special Drawing Rights. And it's already used in the 55 central banks of the world today. It's a global currency that's only used at the highest level of banking. The devaluation of the dollar, because of the Federal Reserve's actions on quantitative easing, has lowered the value of our currency significantly. Recently, the dollar was only worth less than 77 cents. If, and I believe this is where you're headed with this information about the regime change, and one reason I believe that the State Department memo and promoting regime change is, in fact, to cause us to default on our notes or debt to these Arab countries, because maybe under the heading of we will not do business with terrorists, okay, the Muslim Brotherhood looks like they're going to take power. If that be the case, this will cause a default from the Federal Reserve on these Treasury notes, and could be the demise of and the destruction of the Federal Reserve, a private entity that backs the sovereignty of the U.S. dollar.
So the American dollar must collapse in order for them to bring in their new world order. Now, this is exactly what was told to me way back in those days. We will not produce the oil fields of America. Mr. Kissinger said, to the oil-producing countries in the Middle East back in those days, we will not produce the oil fields of America until, and he said, we won't produce them. You go ahead and buy our T-bills, our Federal Reserve issues. He knew good and well that this would take care of paying the interest on the national debt. I was told in 1976, we will not open the oil fields of America. Oh, folks, we have been betrayed. We literally have been done in by Washington, D.C. Every one of the scoundrels up there ought to be thrown out. Securities that they have bought in good faith, trusting what America had told them after they produced their oil fields, the majors. Now we're going to turn around and double-cross these people. And their T-bills and their securities that they have bought, China holds over $1 trillion of our paper right now. Yep. What's going to happen to it? It's going to become worthless overnight. Can you imagine how they're going to feel about the United States of America when all of this that they have trusted over? Can you imagine Walmart without a single thing on its grocery store shelves, not its grocery store, but on its shelves, without any mark saying made in China?
It'd be empty.
They're going to be livid. Besides, you have it happening right now before you. Now, for the first time in all of these years since Spindletop back in 1901, we are going to begin to produce it because now the elite have the price where they want it so that they can control. Not money. This is not all about money. It's about control. The name of the game is control. Here goes. You're the first ones probably to ever hear this apart from the radio talk shows I've had the privilege of being on today. When this individual sent me this, he put it right across the top. I know who he is. I've spent hours with him. He put right across the top of the communique, I have it here, you better sit down. I knew it was potent. He went on to say, the U.S. Geological Service issued a report on April 2008 that only scientists, he knew about it, and oil men knew was coming. It was a revised report, hadn't been updated since 1995, on how much oil was in the area of the western two-thirds of North Dakota, western South Dakota, and extreme Montana. The Bakken is the largest domestic oil discovery since Prudhoe Bay in Alaska and has the potential for eliminating all, they knew this, when this report was given. They knew at some point they would double-cross the Arabs. They would start the conflict in the Middle East. The Muslim Brotherhood is supported by the elite of the world. They could not do what they were doing if they weren't. These conflicts are going from country to country to country by design plan. I told on your radio broadcast 5 months before, 4 to 5 months before it happened, I said there is going to be a conflict in the Middle East. It started in Egypt. They had told me. Why? Cut off that oil, destroy the value of the currency, make their... We have to somehow get rid of this debt. How are we going to do it? Just merely say your paper's not worth anything anymore. Do you realize at $200 a barrel, we could pay off the entire national debt from our own soil if we had an ounce of honesty left in Washington, D.C.? We have been betrayed by our officials. It's sad. Well, let's go on. I can't get off on that right now. When I first briefed legislators, Terry Johnson said, Montana legislative financial assistant, he said their jawbones almost hit the floor. And this is in the congressional record, by the way. This man put part of this there. The sizable find is now the highest producing offshore oil field in the past 56 years, reported by the Pittsburgh Gazette. Now, let's go on down. How much can they get this out of the ground for? Oh, this is startling. If they will, but they won't. Because remember, they have gotten oil now to $200 a barrel. The dollar, their timeline is the dollar will be dead by the end of 2012. All of this fits into perfect line with the new world order. And because may I tell you what kind it is? There are two kinds of oil in the world. There's the heavy black stuff. There's light sweet crude. The light sweet crude, basically you could take it out of a well, run it through a simple filter, and put it in a diesel engine. It's the most sought after oil in the world. Few places have it. Nigeria has it. Now we've got it. This man told me, he said, this oil field has light, sweet, crude oil, and he said we can produce it for $16 per barrel.
Wow.
Do you realize that could be brought to the gas pump at 60 cents per gallon for gasoline, but they will be charging you 7 and 8 and 9 if you can even get it until this is produced, because there's going to be a lag time between the Middle East and the time that you have oil in America. And when people go hungry, when they can't get groceries for their children and their babies are crying, they will beg the Federal Reserve for another currency. They will plead for a world currency. It's going to be gold-backed. Mark my words. You think gold is high priced now? According to what the elite have said to me, we haven't seen anything. Take the gold today at $1,400 an ounce. Wait until they get it where they want it, according to their timeline. You can turn around and take it at $3,000 to $4,000 per ounce and buy the new world reserve currency with it, and you have lost none of your purchasing power. Hidden 1,000 feet below the surface of the Rocky Mountains lies the largest untapped oil reserve in the world. It is more than 2 trillion barrels. On August the 8th of 2005, President Bush spoke of it, but nobody did anything about it. How big is it? It's 8 times the size of Saudi Arabia's oil field. It's 18 times as much oil as Iraq. It's 21 times as much oil as Kuwait. It's 22 times as much oil as Iran. It's 500 times as much oil as Yemen, and they have known it was there while they're taking gas prices up, and they know what they're doing in the Middle East, and they know what's going to happen to the dollar, and yet they have just announced that they're going to begin the production of it. All according to the New World Order plan. There's 2 more oil fields they're going to open. I wish my book, Energy Non-Crisis, was back in print again. They're going to open up Gull Island. Mark my words. 35 years ago, he told me, we won't open it until we get it to $150 to $200 a barrel. I couldn't understand what he was saying. They'll open it up now. They're going to open up the Arctic Wildlife Refuge and let you have oil from up there. Listen. You say, wait a minute, the ecologists wouldn't allow that. Greenpeace, all of these others, they wouldn't. Yes, they will. When they don't have food on their table, when the dollar has collapsed, when they don't have gasoline to run their automobiles, those ecologists are going to get so quiet you can't imagine. They will beg somebody to give them oil, even though they have fought it during all of these years. I remember one day I was sitting, I'll name him because he passed away just a few months ago. One of these individuals has given me so much information over the years. I was sitting with him in his vehicle up at Prudhoe Bay, or maybe in his office, I forgot. And I said, these ecologists up here are costing you millions of dollars producing this Trans-Alaska oil pipeline. I said, why do you let them do it? He just chuckled, and he said, Chaplain, we support them. I said, what? You give to the Sierra Club? You give to Greenpeace? Yeah. He said, we give to the Democratic Party and we give to the Republican Party. We give millions to each. He said, regardless of which one gets in, we still control them. I mean, this is the thinking, the thought patterns of these elite. Now, this is exactly what we're seeing happen right now. The ecologists, they won't say a word. When they are hungry, they'll beg for oil. They'll beg for a new currency. The oil companies will easily be able to open these up. I could go on and on with this. I've got to go to something else. Recently, after hearing all of this, I said, I've got to tell the American people. I'm going to list right now 12 things that you must do. You must do it immediately. Every person viewing this DVD, I plead with you, based on what I have been given as information in the past few months, I beg you to do 13, I had 12, I added one to it a week or two ago. You must do these things immediately. You don't have to stay awake at night and worry if you'll take action now. you don't have to look behind trees if you'll do something now. But you can't wait till the end of 2012. There is a very prominent Hispanic activist, a lady, in Phoenix, Arizona. We know her. My wife and son are listening as we're doing this today. They can verify that these things took place. This very prominent Hispanic activist knew Janet Napolitano very well when Janet Napolitano was the governor of Arizona. Janet Napolitano then went to Washington and is the head of Homeland Security. Janet Napolitano contacted this individual and said, we would like to have you as the liaison between the Hispanic communities of America and the federal government. She filled out all the paperwork, was accepted. She went to Washington, met with the president and Janet Napolitano numbers of months ago, and said, I'm ready to take my job. Promised $170,000 per year. And at the time, Janet Napolitano said, now, I know that you are a very devout Christian. Janet knows her well. She knows Janet well. She knows what Janet is, knows about all of her girlfriends. And I won't go any further. But she said, I know that you're a very devout Christian, but she said, in order for you to take this job, you must agree with the president on every policy. You cannot disagree in any way. She said, secondly, you can never mention abortion. And she said, likewise, you can never talk about homosexuality and lesbianism. This lady, very prominent, outstanding Christian, said to both the president and Janet, I cannot deny my Lord. I will not agree to those things. I turned down the job. The president said, thank you very much, goodbye. She came back home. A few weeks ago, this individual from Phoenix, Arizona, went to Washington to try to raise some money for one of her Hispanic organizations here locally. Somehow Janet Napolitano found out she was there and called her on the phone. Don't know how. They keep in touch with people, as you know. And said, I would like us to have dinner together. They did, privately, just the two of them. In the course of the meal, Janet Napolitano said to this individual, whom we know, I want to ask you to go back to Phoenix, Arizona. I want you to immediately get 6 months of food and water in your house. And she said, I cannot tell you why. I have only told this to a few of my friends. But she said, I want you to immediately go back and get 6 months of food and water. And she said, well, please tell me, what's the danger? She said, I can't. You just take my word for it. I know what I'm talking about. This was only weeks ago. Now, the first thing on my list is, I beg you, you must prepare for the inevitable. There is no reason for you to suffer because of what the elite are doing. And the first thing on the list would be the recommendation that Janet Napolitano made to this friend of ours. The second thing on the list is, now if you have any doubts whatsoever as to what's going to happen to the stock market, you're bound to realize that when the securities, when the oil goes to $200 a barrel, the securities are worthless. Their timeline in 2012 takes place. Now the stock market is being held up today by the plunge protection team. They never wanted to admit to this up until about 6 months ago. They finally admitted to the plunge protection team. And anytime the stock market starts down, they just go in and bolster it. They'll buy it, they'll do whatever's necessary that day. And the Federal Reserve has literally spent billions of dollars to keep the American stock market up. There is a time at which they will not keep it up any longer. If you have any doubt in your mind whatsoever, go to YouTube, and don't take my word for it. Go to YouTube and find Tony Robbins, T-O-N-Y-R-O-B-I-N-S. Watch his DVD, and you'll definitely do something about it. Secondly, you need cash. You need to have enough to be able to sustain your household for a number of months' time. I'm suggesting maybe 3 months. Not in the bank, not in your checking account. You've got to have it. Cash won't be that much good for too long because they're coming in with a world currency. Mark my words, it's out there. And they already know that it'll be gold-backed from what I'm hearing. But You need to make preparation for your house during that interim period of time. Next, 401ks. Oh my goodness. You notice I'm not the youngest guy in the world. But I feel so much for the retirees of today who have in confidence trusted their Social Security, which has been squandered, and their 401ks that they're losing money in, and their retirement funds that they're not going to have. Rodney, I don't know whether you even have suggestions or not, but...
Well, one thing that I've been telling people in regards to their 401ks is to take their money out of the equities and the bonds that are within the 401k. In other words, in the shelter of a 401k, there are many options that people can choose. One of which is an interest-bearing account. Now, at times, historically speaking, when the interest rates go up, the stock market goes down. And conversely, when the stock market goes up, interest rates go down. We've just seen the end of this particular cycle. So what people need to be doing is contacting the person that is in charge of the 401k, tell them, get me out of the stock market, not tomorrow, get me out now, today, and move my money to where it's safe and earning interest for me. It's better to earn 2% interest on a positive side than it is to lose 70, 80% on the negative side.
Thank you. Next, gold and silver. You haven't seen anything. You think gold and silver prices are high now? You just wait. I know, I can't afford to buy gold anymore. I wish I could, because I know where it's going. 6, travel. It is going to be disrupted. When the price of crude oil gets to $200 a barrel, the airlines are going to have major problems. The trucking lines will have problems. You will have problems with the railroads of America. Next, debt. Oh my goodness, people, pay off your debt. Get out of debt. You say, I can't. Well, that's right. Some people can't. You can't pay off that house. Well, you can't. If you can't, you can't. But don't go and put money on that credit card. Don't spend money you don't have. America is going to be facing a crisis that you cannot afford to be in debt. My next suggestion, at any cost, a log cabin is better than a $2 million mansion that has a mortgage on it. You positively must have a roof over your head paid for. I have been told that when the dust has settled, that because the Federal Reserve is bailing out all of the lending institutions, whether it be Fannie, Freddie, the taxpayers bailing out General Motors, Chrysler, the pension funds, everything else, because of what's going to happen to the dollar, eventually, when the dust settles, the Federal Reserve, the elite of the world, will own every mortgage in the United States of America, whether it be commercial or residential. The elite will own every mortgage because they have bailed them out, just as did Chrysler and General Motors, and you will be making your house payment to the Federal Reserve. You don't want this to happen.
In essence, giving them control over all of the property and real estate.
The name of the game is control. I've been saying this for 35 years. It's not money, it's control. Obsessed with it. Again, government. You're going to see more and more government intervention in our lives. It must stop. I don't know how. It cannot be by revolution. It must be peacefully. But there's got to be a change and get government out of our pockets and out of our lives. Again, I don't know what you're going to do, and I hope you'll give some thought to it, and I want to say 2 words: firearms. Now, do with that what you want to. In a few moments, we're going to have a pastor tell us what we should do spiritually. So I'll leave off that one. He's very apt at what he's doing, and it's a privilege to have a man of God present what people should do today. And I've added one thing to this. Oh, I've actually added 2. Where do you live? I made a survey recently of where the elite live. I was amazed, dumbfounded. I found out where And I contacted these two friends of mine. I said, where does this person and this person, where does this CEO and this person live? Not one single elite has his primary residence in a city. Every one of them have moved away from where they know the problem's going to be. And lastly, you must make preparation for the health care of your household. The health care system is going to have problems along with the other, especially if Mr. Obama exceeds with what he wants in Obamacare. You must take preparations for your household. Now, I want to prove to you that the elite, not just the ones I know, but some of the others knew this in advance. Now, I've talked about things that they told me. I've told you things that have happened that they told me, and it came to pass, which I recorded in the past, and it happened exactly like they told me. I'm going to show you one now that I want you to go and do your research on your own. I'm going to give you some homework to do to those out there in the viewing audience. It's called insider trading. There are two classifications of people. I'm glad you're nodding your head there. It's a good sign. There are two classifications of people that invest in Wall Street. Number one is John Q. Public, and number two is insider trading. According to the government and the law, they are required to keep records on certain insider trading, which is the CEOs, the corporate heads, the super wealthy, and records have to be kept on what they buy and what they sell. I began records back in September when a friend said something is happening with insider trading on the New York stock market. September the 13th through the 17th, it was 400 to 1. Now let me try to explain to the layman out in the audience. There were 400 insiders who were selling stock in their own companies compared to one person that, according to their stockbroker, is following his advice, that was cashing in or doing anything about their stocks. Then, on October the 4th through the, oh, by the way, that's the highest it had ever been in the history of the New York stock market, that 400 to 1. September the 4th through the 8th, we were dumbfounded. It went to 1,600 to 1. Now, these are records. You can find it in your computer. Go to the stock market, find it out for yourself. This is record fact. 1,600 to 1 that were cashing out of the stock market. I kept records week after week after week. I'm going down for lack of time. November the 15th through the 19th, it was 8,280 to 1 that cashed out and sold their own company stocks and got out of the stock market, and yet the stockbroker was still advising the man on the streets to still buy from Wall Street.
Exactly.
Now I'm coming to the latest records that we have. This is startling beyond words. And if this doesn't tell you everything about the stock that a person holds in the stock market, nothing ever will. January 10 through 14 of this year, 2011, insiders sold $163 million worth of their stock on Wall Street in that 1 7-day period, and for the first time ever in the history of Wall Street, not one single insider bought 1 penny of stock.
Wow.
Where are they putting it?
It's a good question.
I'll prove it to you. I have it right here. Go and look at it. You'll find this in the records of the United States Mint. The United States Mint recorded in the month of December. This is fact. Go on your computer. I beg people to watch this. December, the United States Mint sold 2,221,000 ounces of silver, the highest ever in record. This was startling, and it's scary. Then we come down to the first 12 days of January. 12 days only. First 12 days of January, the United States Mint sold 3,407,000 ounces of silver. Who's buying it? Those people.
Exactly.
The elite. They know what's about to happen. They're bailed out. They could care less about you.
That's right.
Now, not all of the CEOs of companies are parts of the elite. Some of them are, some of them aren't. I just happened, by the providence of God, to have had contact with some way up here that could give me these things. Now, you ready? January. The total month of January 2011, the United States Mint sold 6,400,000 ounces of silver.
Multiply that by $32. That's a lot of money.
Now, who bought it? I can't buy it. I went to a silver dealer the other day and I said I wanted some 1 ounce coins. He said, I'm sorry, I'm sold out. Can't find any. I tried to buy one of those green boxes recently, you know, that the Mint sells it in. Nowhere. They're non-existent in the area, in the state where I live. I can't buy one. Even if I wanted it, had the money to pay for it, I couldn't buy it. The dealer said, we'll sell you a roll. Maybe. Next week we'll have a few extra ones. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Middle East. The Muslim Brotherhood is a religious and political group founded in the belief that Islam is not simply a religion, but it's a way of life. They believe in jihad. You saw the clip before and the sound bite of what they were chanting, and I believe it was in Egypt. Now, I'll give you a sign. There are a few signs that the elite have given me. Here is one of them. The euro, you're not hearing much about it recently because the Middle East is overshadowing everything that's happening over there with the European Union and the euro and those countries, which is as much in debt today as they were back then. You're just not hearing about it because other things are overshadowing them. The European Union is going to have problems. And the euro will eventually collapse along with the American dollar because they must do that in order to bring in the new world order. You have, now here's a sign, you have between 2 and 3 weeks when you see the euro collapse to get out of paper or you're going to lose it. And this is the way it was expressed to me. He said, if it's written on a piece of paper, it's worth the paper it's written on. Now, I can't say it any plainer. And you better start now, because when you see that euro begin to collapse, you may not have time to get out of that 401k. You may not have time to do something about that retirement fund. Do you realize that as of last week, now I'm giving you some very rapid, startling facts here because we've got to close out. Do you realize that as of last week, the Federal Reserve surpassed China as the largest holder of United States debt? They're buying their own debt. I was told 2 years ago by this gentleman who was giving me all this information. He said, Chaplain, the day that the Federal Reserve begins to buy the T-bills, to buy their own debt back, he said, that's the end. He said, it's all over. Now, for the first time, as of last week, the Federal Reserve holds more debt than China did. I was given these expressions right at 2 years ago. I'll quote him verbatim, because I was on the phone with this gentleman and I was dumbfounded. That was at the time I said, how can I spare myself? And he said, I'll give you these expressions. He said, within 2 years you will not recognize America. This was nearly 2 years ago. And I recorded it on 6 DVDs. I begged the people out in the viewing audience, if you have not gotten my 6 DVD set, in which 8 hours of DVD viewing, by the way, that we recorded previous to this, if you have not gotten them, please do. Everything that the elite have told me for the past 3 years are on those DVDs. And you can watch it take place because it was recorded before it happened. And you can't say Lindsey Williams said it after the fact, or they gave it to me after the fact. He said, within 2 years you'll not recognize America. He said, after 2 years you'll be so poor you won't be able to do anything about it. I mean, he said it outright. So poor. What was he basically saying? I didn't realize what he was saying back then, that your dollar is going to collapse. He said again, by 2012, the dollar will be dead. That's the time he gave me this expression. He said again one time, he said, there will be no shortage of food whatsoever on the grocery store shelves, but he said, you may not be able to afford it. You may go hungry. He said again, within 2 years, nearly everyone will be working for the government. And he said this before Chrysler and General Motors was bailed out. And I couldn't understand what the man was saying. Now, do you realize that if Mr. Obama has Obamacare put in, that every doctor, every nurse, every dentist, every medical professional in America will be working for the government of the United States of America. Every insurance company, every hospitalization plan will be a part of the United States government if they have their way. And this man said it to me, and I didn't know what he was saying. I see it now so plainly. I want to give you another sign. I gave you one, that's the euro. You've got 2 to 3 weeks to get out of paper after you see the euro have its problem. The next sign he gave to me a number of years ago. He said, watch the price of crude oil and you will know the progression of the elite. You'll know where they are in their timeline. You must prepare medically. Again, China is the big one. China has loaned more money. Oh, this, please. China is the upcoming thing. United States of America must go down. China must come up, according to the New World Order. China has loaned more money to developing countries than the World Bank. This is startling, because now these countries are obligated to China. China is moving troops into North Korea. I won't get into that. America, what are we seeing? Well, it's obvious. Boeing aircraft, Caterpillar, all of these moving abroad. Why have I produced this DVD? I felt a moral obligation. In fact, the producer of the Coast to Coast, the most listened to radio talk show in the world, 63 million listeners on any given night. When she called me back last week, she had asked me before, she said, Chaplain Williams, why are you giving all this? And I said, because I feel a moral obligation to tell the American people what by the providence of God I have been allowed to know. There was dead silence on the phone. She expected me to say I was doing it for dollars and cents.